Hi there. In this business topic video, we're going to provide an introduction to the cash flow forecast. Now, of course, we know that in business, cash flow is an incredibly important part of business life. And I guess the main reason for that is that it's pretty unpredictable. It's a very dynamic thing, is cash flow. And for businesses, particularly startups or businesses involved in high risk operations, cash flow can be the reason why a business gets into difficulty and also why it fails. So it's incredibly important for a business to be able to at least produce a simple and reasonably reliable cash flow forecast as part of its usual management disciplines. So there's lots of good reasons why a cash flow forecast should be produced. So before we take a look at a simple example of how it all works, let's just think why it's so useful. Firstly, it's really useful as a way of giving management or other stakeholders in the business advance warning of when the cash may run out, where there may be a shortfall of cash based on what the business needs to spend. For example, looking forward into the future will the business have enough cash to be able to pay its suppliers? Will it have enough cash at the end of the month to pay the wages and the salaries? And also, the cash flow forecast is a great way of providing those who invest in a business or lend to a business, providing them with some assurance that the business is being properly managed and it has appropriate financial control. Now, just before we look at a simple example of the cash flow forecast, let's just remind ourselves of how cash flows into and out of a business. There are a variety of different types of cash inflows. For example, cash sales from customers. You sell for cash, they give you the cash and you bank it. It could also be cash later on received from customers who've been allowed to buy on credit, receipts from trade debtors. But of course, there's lots of other ways cash can come in. For example, it could be that a loan is received from a bank. The cash actually flows into the bank account. Or it could be that some new shares are issued. So the issue of shares is a cash inflow. And of course, you can also sell assets. So the disposal for cash of fixed assets would be seen as a cash inflow. Well, of course, in business, cash comes in, but it also goes out. So don't forget the key outflows are going to be the major items like payments to suppliers, typically where even if suppliers have allowed the business to have some period of credit, you still got to pay them eventually. Of course, paying the wages and the salaries to the staff, and also paying interest on any bank loans or overdrafts or other debt in the business. Those are cash outflows. The key thing with the cash flow forecast is to try and work out what the inflows are going to be each period, what the outflows are going to be, and to see what the effect is on the forecast net cash balance. So let's just finish off this introduction to the cash flow forecast by looking at a simple example, which is on the screen there. So these numbers are in thousands here, and we can see that we've got 3 months for our forecast. Let's just have a quick look at the lines. The top line, the sales receipts, that's a positive number coming in, 50,000 in January, 55,000 in Feb, 60,000 in March. And then we've got 3 lines which show some outflows, some cash outflows. Payments to suppliers of 10, 15 and 20 respectively. Payment of the wages and salaries, which looks like it's 15,000 each month in Jan, Feb and March. And then there's one item on purchase of fixed assets. So nothing in January or March, but there's a 40,000 outflow of payment in February. First thing to do with the cash flow forecast is to add up the inflows and take away the outflows to see what is the net. If you add them all up, it's known as the net cash flow. So net cash flow is total inflows less total outflows. If you add those up for those months, you can see that in January, we had inflows of 50 and outflows of 25, which means a net cash flow, a positive cash flow of 25. However, in February, it's not so good. We had inflows of 55, but we had a total of 70 outflows there, including that 40 of fixed assets. That means that if you add together the sales receipts and all the payments, there was a net cash outflow of £15,000. And in March, we were back to positive again, a net inflow of £25,000. That's the key part of a cash flow forecast, to work out the net cash flow. What you can then do is work out what happens to the cash balance. And the way to do this is to use what's known as opening and closing balance. So let's say the opening balance was 10,000 at the start of January. We know that the net cash inflow in the month was 25. That must mean that the closing balance at the end of the month was £35,000. And if you imagine what happens at the end of a month, it transfers over to the start of the next month. So the closing balance in one period becomes the opening balance in the next period. So £35,000 at the end of Jan becomes the opening balance at the start of Feb. We know that our net cash outflows are negative of 15, which must mean that the bank balance fell by 15,000 from 35 to 20. So 20 carries forward to March, and we know that 25,000 came in net in March. Therefore, we must have a closing balance of 45. Now, that's a very simple example of how the cash flow forecast works. More complex examples would have maybe more lines. You might have to add up all the inflows. But essentially, that's how a cash flow forecast is constructed. In later videos, we'll take a look at some of the issues in interpreting cash flow forecasts, particularly in the context of what a business can do to help manage its cash flow better. But for now, that's just a brief introduction to the concept of the cash flow forecast.